Well, welcome everybody. This is our sixth of seven webinars as part of the Counseling Center Summer Webinar Series, and we hope this summer webinar series has been helpful for students and faculty and staff as they are, working from home, studying from home, and whatnot. So today we'll be talking about Introduction to Self-Compassion, and Dr. Mark Province will be presenting for us. He does have some questions for engagement for y'all in the audience, so please feel free to use the chat feature to respond to those questions that he poses. And towards the end, we'll have a time for Q&A. And for that Q&A part, I'm going to ask for y'all to use the Q&A function in Zoom just to keep those questions separated for us. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Mark to get us started.
Thank you, Richard. So welcome everyone. My name is Mark. I am one of the staff psychologists here and I lead a group on self-compassion. It's definitely an area of interest for me, partly because I use it in my own life. And so I'll share a little bit about kind of what has been helpful for me with self-compassion. And a lot of this comes through my own experience. And then a lot also comes from me leading the group and hearing people's stories of what has worked for them and what has helped them. But you don't have to have any prior experience with self-compassion or even know what that means to benefit from this. So I'm glad you're here. I'm going to ask for your compassion. I'm going to try to practice what I preach today and be compassionate to myself if I'm kind of struggling with the technology or anything like that. We'll just kind of be learning this new way of doing presentations together, but I'm glad you're trying it out. You actually may have more experience than I do because this is the 6th out of 7, so some of you might have been at a bunch of these. But I thought I would test out the chat feature by just having you send in, if you can just put in the chat your favorite color. I just kind of want to see what it looks like. So go ahead and now, like if it's blue, just write the word blue and send it. And that way I can see some responses. Okay, oh good, oh periwinkle, nice, okay. Seeing a lot of blues, that's my favorite, not to influence you. Maroon, teal, green, orange, pink, purple, green. Nice, turquoise, fun. Okay, some variations. Anyone not sent theirs yet? Try to get your colors in. Okay, this is great. So what I'll do kind of throughout, sometimes I just wanted to get like a hand raise so you can see and I can see like who's a yes or no to something maybe. So if we go that way, I might just say send in a yes, send in a no, something like that. And we'll go from there. So this is the intro to self-compassion. And I'm going to start by, if you can go to the first slide, Dr. Martinez. I like to start by just sort of illustrating it. And one of my favorite comic strips from the 80s and 90s when I was growing up was Calvin and Hobbes. If you're not familiar with it, it's a sort of imaginary tale about a little boy with blonde hair who's pretty mischievous, and then he has a stuffed tiger that's his friend, and only he can see the tiger coming to life. So the boy's name is Calvin, the tiger's name is Hobbes. And if you look at this, basically you have the very top is the beginning of the day. So you have Calvin, he's putting on his underwear and he's flexing in the mirror and he feels really good about it. And what you don't know yet, because he doesn't say it till the end, those are rocket ship underpants. So like when you're a kid and you have like, your Scooby-Doo or your rocket ship or your, I think I had Thundercats in the 80s, whatever it was, you feel pretty cool and you're like feeling good about your day. So you can tell he like leaves the door with a lot of confidence, like he's ready to just have a great day. And then all this stuff happens to him. So he sits in a chair with bubble gum in it and it sticks to his bottom. And then you've got like, he gets caught cheating on a test, beaten up by the bully, the water fountain sprays him. It looks like probably he's gotten like a frog or a bug or something that's climbed out of his bag for show and tell. He doesn't get picked for baseball team. He has gross food at lunch. no swings available, doesn't know the answer in class, wishes he were outside, misses the bus, and gets rained on. So terrible day. Kind of reminds me of that other book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And we've all had days like that. Everyone can relate to those days where it's just like nothing goes your way. Send in a yes if you've had a day like this at some point in your life, if you've had a miserable day. And I will raise my hand for a yes, absolutely, definitely, yes. Okay, so we're relating to this. A lot of people, this is a group, like any group of people that are honest, is going to have had days like this. So what do you need at the end of a day like this? You need to go home and have someone be really kind to you, right? Like that's what everyone wants. You want, oh, I see one with a yup with a monkey too. Yeah, it's like you just want to like block out the world at the end of a day like this. So what you want when you come home, or even during the day, ideally, it'd be great if one of these bubbles sort of included, a little pause for him or someone's being nice to him, but that doesn't happen in Calvin's day. So at the end of the day, you need something kind, right? Because you're suffering. He's suffering so much in this. He's sweating. He's grossed out. He's mad. He's sad. All this stuff happens. So what do you want to hear? You want to hear something like, that really sucks. I hate that you had that day. I'm here with you. I'm here for you. That kind of thing. You don't want someone to rub it in more or blame it on you. Well, the irony is that sometimes when we have days like this, we actually get harder on ourselves. And that's for several reasons. One is we're trying to think that we have some control over it. So it's like, if we're to blame, maybe we did something that we can fix, even if it's just stuff that happens. The other reason is that we're really stressed after a day like this. And when you're stressed, sometimes your mind goes back to those old patterns of just negative messages about yourself. So it's hard to give a kind message to yourself at the end of the day. Sometimes we need to start with someone else doing it for us. So looking at the end of this, the end of his day, now Calvin's at home, he's dry from the rain. He's comfy in his bed with his stuffed tiger, and he says, Hobbs, some days, even my lucky rocket ship underpants don't help. And Hobbs, who's very compassionate to him, says, well, you've done all you can do. So he's not blaming. He's kind to him. He's there with him. He's hanging out. He's spending time together. And that, to me, because Hobbs is basically in Calvin's head, it's his imagination, it's also kind of his self-compassion, because he's telling himself, you did all you could do. So that's an illustration of what I hope this can look like for people, is that you begin to say kind things to yourself, like you did what you could do, and not the kind of beating yourself up at the end of the day. And that's really what self-compassion is. Richard, if you can move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so Kristen Neff is a UT Austin professor who wrote the book on self-compassion. Literally, it's called Self-Compassion. And she's one of the first researchers, psychologists, to study self-compassion and really define what it is. So she breaks it down into 3 different things. She says self-compassion, when I studied this with a lot of people, breaks down into 1, self-kindness. So when you're having a bad day, you just need some kindness to yourself. And that has to do with the words that you say to yourself. You're still a good person. People care about you. You're worthwhile. And maybe kindness, self-kindness is also things you would do for yourself. Like a kind thing might be letting yourself have an extra long hot bath that night, or letting yourself just enjoy something that you usually don't get to enjoy. Maybe you watch an extra episode of your favorite show or something like that. Common humanity has to do with not having to feel isolated and alone. So when we're really struggling, sometimes we isolate ourselves a lot, or we feel like no one else can understand or would want to be with us. We tell ourselves we're the worst, or no one else struggles with this. And common humanity is it's saying, I'm a human, and it's okay to have a bad day, and it's okay even if you feel like you made a big mistake and you're beating yourself up about that mistake. It's sort of saying making mistakes is part of being human too. And then mindfulness. So mindfulness is being able to sort of press pause and say, how am I doing? What am I needing right now? It's sort of like how to be compassionate with other people. You press pause with them instead of saying like, here's what I need from you, or let me talk to you about my day. It's actually pausing and saying, how are you right now? And what do you need from me? And so mindfulness is sort of doing that for yourself. It's pressing pause, taking a time out and just saying, how are you? Taking your own temperature. And it's kind of the opposite of just plowing through your day, focusing on, just being productive, or on the other hand, just over-identification is what Kristen Neff calls it. So sometimes when you get really overwhelmed, you kind of start, it's hard to see how you can pause or check in with yourself. So mindfulness helps you do that. And there's some basic mindfulness tools that I'll talk about with you at the end of this, since that's a part of it. So again, to review, what is self-compassion? It's being kind to yourself, reminding yourself you're not alone, and pressing pause. Okay, next slide, please. But a lot of people, probably everyone, struggles to be self-compassionate. We struggle to be kind to yourselves. And there are all kinds of obstacles. So when I've done groups over the years, people have told me all kinds of things, and I relate to a lot of these about why it's hard to do this. So one example is people will think that self-compassion is the same thing as self-pity. So they'll say, well, I don't like feeling sorry for myself, and I don't like it when people feel sorry for me. So I don't want to do that. And I kind of agree. I don't really like people just feeling sorry for me, because that makes me feel like, oh, they're kind of looking down on me, right? Versus saying like, I'm a human and everyone is human, and we struggle with things together. I don't have to be alone in my struggles. Sometimes people will say too that self-compassion is the same thing as self-indulgence. So basically like saying, I'm going to give up on my goals. If your goal is to learn how to swim, self-indulgence might be like, one day you go swimming and it's hard and you don't know how to do it. And so you say like, it's too hard. I'm going to be compassionate to myself. I'm not going to try anymore. Right. And it's okay in a journey like that to decide that. But self-compassion usually would look like, well, okay, reminding yourself, here's why I want, if it really is your goal, here's why I want to do this. Here's why I want to learn to swim. So I'm going to be kind to myself that I don't have to be perfect. I'm going to ask for help, that kind of thing. But it's not the same thing as just totally giving up on your goals. So for whatever your goals are, if it's being in school, if it's learning something new, if it's being able to build a relationship, it's being able to keep going with that goal, but in a kinder way to yourself. And then self-esteem. And a lot of people just are kind of confused about the difference. So I like to say self-esteem is more like how you see yourself, and self-compassion is more how you treat yourself or act towards yourself or talk to yourself, that kind of thing. Okay, go ahead and next slide, please. Okay, so how do you begin to be self-compassionate? I'm going to talk about these different places of where self-compassion can come from. So you could think about it as like self-compassion is this river, but there are a lot of sources that go into the river that kind of feed into it. So these are some of the different like springs that feed into that river. One is from other people. So from relationships, from social connections, from family members. Self-compassion may be, remembering that one person or group of people who have been compassionate with you in your life. And sometimes it's hard to find that. Sometimes we're in families or in situations where it's really, people do not treat us well, and we don't have a lot of those examples. It can make it hard to be self-compassionate when you don't have much compassion in your life. But sometimes there's that one person, maybe it was a teacher who is really kind to you, or a friend who is so compassionate. It could be a grandparent. And so holding them in your mind as sort of this, and then beginning to like internalize them, keep them inside you, and listen to their voice saying, I love you, or you're worthy, or you tried your best, or something like that. And then also finding those relationships now with people who build you up, because they're going to reinforce self-compassion by being kind to you. So that's relationships. That's one source of self-compassion. Go ahead and switch slides. Okay, so the next one, for people who identify as spiritual, sometimes compassion comes from a higher power. So the idea is that it may come from, and even it may be ancestors who aren't alive anymore, but pulling compassion from them. Sometimes different spiritual traditions have different versions of this, but something spiritual sort of feeding into self-compassion can be another source for people who really value spirituality. Go ahead and switch to the next slide. Self-compassion can come from art or pop culture. So for me, sometimes when I'm feeling like down on myself, I'll think about some of Harry Potter's conversations with Dumbledore. And some of the kind things that Dumbledore would say to him. Or, there are examples everywhere. Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, or I'm going to think of some examples that aren't just white people nerd references, with other examples of characters. I mean, I think every cultural tradition has great examples of these, and it doesn't just have to be books or movies. It can come from examples of songs, stories, and it doesn't even have to be about self-compassion. It could just be a song that makes you feel good. So for my next poll, I'm curious to know any examples from y'all that you can think of. It may just be somewhere that you go for comfort. What is an example of like a recording artist, musician, a movie that you watch when you're feeling low to kind of help you through that? It could be a favorite book. Anything that comes to mind on that, just throw it into the chat. 300, nice one. Okay, that's cool. And I'm assuming that's the movie or maybe the comic 300, Star Wars. Okay. Avatar, yeah. A lot of my friends have been watching that lately. Smooth Jazz, Spartans, Goonies, great. And so some of these actually have examples of, fried green tomatoes, a lot of compassion in that one, right? Louis Armstrong, love that. Music, scripture, reaching out to really, really good friends. These are awesome examples. So, and most of these are examples of some form of art, some kind of culture. Boys on the Side, movie, great. So where the heart is, sometimes it's those ones that tug at your heartstrings. I wouldn't call 300 or Spartans like movies that tug at your heart, but I can see how, they might comfort you or inspire you different ways. So I think those are great examples. I think that I read all of them at this point. So now you can pull from each other's too. So this is another source. Go to those and even seek them out. Look at lists of inspiring movies or ask your friends, like, what are the movies that help you feel better about yourself, right? Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so a tiny little biology lesson. A part of our nervous system is designed to calm us down, soothe us, and relax us. And that's called our parasympathetic nervous system. And it's easy to remember once you learn it because parasympathetic goes along with parachute. So when you think about, you're falling out of a plane, you might be really panicked. Once you pop that parachute, it's pulling you down slowly and gently, and it's going to keep you safe. And so you have this system in your body. That's the system that comes online anytime you slow down your breathing. Maybe it happens when you let yourself cry or when you talk about it with someone. It's that feeling of relief. And sometimes it's even like a physical relief. Oh, I just saw Whitney Houston, Bring Me a Higher Love. Great one too. Sometimes, you can feel that physical relief, like a weight has been lifted off your chest or your body feels lighter. Well, your body actually has a built-in system to do that. So sometimes it just needs some reminders for that system to come online. It doesn't happen right away. Sometimes we need some help getting there. Therapy can be a good tool for that, but we have some great self-help resources on our website, like Tao Therapy Assistant Online. A lot of what those will do is teach you how to access that part of your nervous system so that you can learn to do this. And that's a great source of self-compassion, is just doing those things that help your nervous system calm down is a good way to be kind to yourself. Okay, next slide, please. Intellectual. So, your nervous system is all about your body, but your brain also connected to your nervous system, part of it. Your brain has this great piece called the prefrontal cortex, and that talks to the emotion center in your brain, but what it does is kind of helps you see perspective. And sometimes when you're stuck in a loop of, I'm terrible, I'm terrible, I'm terrible, reminding yourself that there's a whole part of your brain that wants to remind you that you're not. Because that's the frontal cortex that can say, not everything you've done is terrible. Look at that time that you were really kind to someone else and helped them. Or look at that time that you didn't think you could do something and you were brave and you tried it. So it's what kind of helps you step away from the negative loop and see, okay, so what's maybe a time when I was worthwhile, or maybe even just that memory of someone else telling you that. So that's kind of one of your brain's ways of doing this. I think we just have one or two more, if you can keep going with the slides. Sometimes it's fake it till you make it. And what I mean by that is sometimes you just try something and practice it, and then you start to feel it a little bit. So it might be like when you are, learning any new skill. I'll use swimming again. You're going to kind of feel like you don't know what you're doing at first when you're practicing a new stroke. Maybe you already know how to freestyle, but you're learning the backstroke and it just feels super awkward. But you keep kind of practicing those moves and it gets easier over time. Self-compassion can be like that too. So when you make it a habit, when you write down positive things to yourself, when you start building in time each day to do something kind for yourself, when you put in some rituals and routines and habits that are about self-compassion. You all just gave a great example of some art to go to, but we'll talk about more. As you practice it, your mind and your body will start to respond a little bit more quickly and be like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing now. I'm going to start to be compassionate again. Because it's hard. It's because the habit that most of us have, because we live in a world where there are lots of not compassionate messages and sometimes that has to do with how people use power over each other and people being afraid, so they try to hurt other people, and all kinds of reasons why we do this. But we live in a world where there's a lot of not very compassionate stuff, and so changing the habit internally is one place to start. So just practicing it. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so one thing that I will give you as a homework assignment from today that's kind of fun and interesting, actually. If you ever like to take quizzes to kind of learn something about yourself, this is a really quick one. It doesn't take long, maybe 5 minutes at the most. You can do it online and it scores itself right away, and it's the self-compassion scale. So Kristen Neff, who I introduced you to earlier, developed this scale. And when you answer the questions, it's going to give you an overall self-compassion score on a scale of 1 to 5. So if you were maybe, and I doubt anyone has ever gotten a 5 that was honest on this, but maybe the Dalai Lama or someone that has practiced this for years and years and years would get close to a 5. That would be like that highest self-compassion. For kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, if you just really struggle with this, beat yourself up a lot, you may be closer to, I think 1 is the lower end rather than 0. Most people are just somewhere in between. So the cool thing about it is you can retake it, you can try some things, maybe say, I'm going to practice self-compassion for a week. Every day in the next week, I'm going to spend 5 minutes doing something kind for myself. I'm going to let myself pause and breathe a little bit, or I'm going to say no to something that I don't want to do, or I'm going to say kind words to myself, or I'm going to try something new that I'm excited about. And so every day I'm going to practice that. At the end of that week, I'm going to take this same survey and I'm going to see if anything has changed. The cool thing about it too is that it breaks down the score into those components of self-compassion that I talked to you about. So sometimes people are really good at being kind to themselves, but they are pretty isolated when they're suffering. So they really kind of like tell themselves that they're the worst and that, you know, everyone else is better than them. And so you might get a really high kindness score, but a lower score in terms of how much you can remind yourself that it's the common humanity score. So it would break all of that down for you too. It's more than just one overall score. But if you want to keep it simple, you just get a 1 out of 5 on self-compassion, and you can track it over time, which is kind of cool. So the link for this is at the bottom of the page. The basic website, and this is kind of a good one to poke around in because it has a lot of tools. Yes, I will send that link on the chat. Let me actually pull up. I don't know if y'all can see me doing this live. That's okay if not, but I'm going to pull up the link, copy paste it in here. Test your level of self-compassion. Okay, I'm pasting it in, and there you should have it. So the basic part of that URL, just the self-compassion.org, is Kristen Neff's website. And so that's where she has guided meditations. Everything is free. You're welcome. So it's got a lot to it, but the test is on there. It's just test how compassionate you are. Can you open up the chat to all of us? Not sure how to do that. Richard, is that something you can do?
I can see if...
And I can resend it again
It should be going out to everyone.
Awesome.
I just re-put it in the chat for folks again as well.
Cool. But thanks. So just let us know if you can't access that link. You can see your posts. We cannot see each other's posts. Interesting. Okay. So when I read out everyone's posts, I think I covered all of them, but it sounds like, okay, so the person who put Louis Armstrong couldn't see the person who put fried green tomatoes as their kind of go-to. So I'm going to try when I do this, and I'm asking for ideas to read them out so you can see them or hear them, that is. So I think we've covered the scale. If you can keep us to the next slide, please. Okay, so just a tiny bit of research behind self-compassion, and this is actually not Kristen Neff, but someone else who studied self-compassion and saw self-compassion, when you increase it, gives you higher, or it goes along with higher emotional connectedness, happiness, and psychological well-being, lower anxiety, depression, shame, and fear of failure. So, and there are tons of these studies. This is just one, but there is a lot of research behind how self-compassion can be helpful in your life. So that's just a little plug for practicing this. And the nice thing too is you don't have to do it perfectly to get these benefits. So a little bit of an increase in self-compassion means a little bit of an increase or decrease in these other areas too. It's not all or nothing. So I always like things that are like that. Can I go to the next slide, please? All right, so now I'm going to talk about some activities, some examples, some tools you can use to build self-compassion in your life. So this is one I really like. It's kind of a metaphor of having 3 different chairs in a room. So if you imagine a room with 3 different people in 3 different chairs, and using this little visual, imagining that on the right side is your self-critical voice. Okay, and I'll have you just kind of do this in your own heads. You don't have to share these. But so if we do this together briefly, I want you to picture in that right-hand chair that critical voice, and actually kind of picture what it looks like. Maybe it's a version of you, maybe it's someone else, maybe it's kind of like the little angel and devil on your shoulder, some version of that, maybe it's like a little monster, something like that. So try to imagine that voice and then try to hear, and again, challenge yourself as much as you feel safe and comfortable doing. So it may not feel that comfortable or safe to really lean into listening to a self-critical voice, and so don't go there if you don't want to. But maybe there's a version that feels okay to kind of hear. And that would be kind of listening to this voice. So an example might be, for me, if I'm late to a meeting, I might beat myself up for that. And my self-critical voice, it might be a little like gremlin kind of character, not the cute gremlin, but one of the mean ones, would say something like, you're always late. And, everyone notices you walking in late and judges you for that, right? So that would be the self-critical voice saying that. Then on the left side is the criticized voice. So that's the part of you that has to hear that, right? So in my example, the gremlin, the mean gremlin is saying, you're, worthless, you're always late, something like that. And the criticized voice, if I start to picture that and listen to that, that's going to connect me with another part of what's going on. So the example there might be, that's really hard to hear, or I feel like you're hanging up on me, or sometimes that voice feels like they've been kind of like beaten down over time, and sometimes they'll just say, yeah, you're right, I am worthless, and they'll kind of agree, right? That's like there's the attacking one, and the one that's sort of been attacked might not feel like it might feel kind of quiet in your mind. And then there's the compassionate observer. So that's sitting in the center chair, kind of watching both of them, watching the whole interaction. So imagine that compassionate observer for you. That's the person that kind of watches everything and has a lot of compassion, kindness. It may be in the form of that one person in your life who's been compassionate to you. For me, it might look like my grandma, right, who's been super kind to me in my life. So that's an example. So when you do this, it's being able to picture and listen to all three. And sometimes I actually will like kind of move my position in my chair to kind of feel it in my body a little bit more. Sometimes I might write this out, or if you're artistic, to draw a picture. It might be something that you say out loud to someone else, but it's just a way of connecting all of the different sides of what's going on rather than just listening to the self-critical voice. Sometimes I think when I've done this in groups, people have shared one thing they've realized about it is their self-critical voice is kind of scared too, or doesn't know what else to do. It's kind of like a parent who really wants their kid to behave or like is really embarrassed. And so they're doing the best they can, but their best is not good enough. And it ends up being like really beating up on their kid, right? And they need to learn a new way to help their kid, just like we need to learn new ways to help ourselves. Okay. We're going to keep posts just to me, just to help with privacy, so you can't see others' names and things like that. And I guess I should caveat that if you put something out there, I'm not going to say people's names, but I may read out. I should have said that at the start. So if you have something that you don't want people to hear, if you're given an example, I would just hang on to that, because I will try to read them out. But again, I will not share people's names. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a type of meditation. So when people think of meditation, a lot of times they think of sitting in a lotus position in a chair, saying Om, in a like relaxing environment. And what I try to talk about when I help people with meditation, and I do this myself, is meditation can be anywhere and any time and while doing almost anything. And so I think actually it's an easier start when this is new for you to do something while you're meditating and pay attention to that thing. So since we're talking about self-compassion, the example that I'm going to give is choosing something that you enjoy. And especially choosing something that you enjoy with your senses. So for me, I love oranges and clementines and nectarines and tangerines. Nectarines is something else, but I still like that. I love citrus fruit. And so I will sometimes, and I love the process of it, the kind of ritual of peeling it. And when you peel off the peel, sometimes it kind of like has a little spritz and a little zest, and there's kind of the feeling of, and I like to put oranges in the fridge and then eat them when they're cold. And so this is something that I would do it with. And I would slow myself down while I'm doing it. And I would remind myself while I'm doing it that this is part of my self-compassion for the day. So it's saying like, I'm a human and I need to eat, and this is a nice thing that I can do for myself that I can enjoy, and it's not costing anyone anything except a little bit of change that it costs to buy the orange. And I kind of slow that down, and I pay attention to all 5 of my senses. So that's another part of this, is try to access as many of your senses as you can. And what that's doing, it's accessing your parasympathetic nervous system. This is your parachute beginning. It's another way to do that. So any other ideas for something that's a daily activity that you like to do that you could slow down a little bit and enjoy it? And I'll share those with the group. So again, mine is slowing down oranges. Another example might just be like stretching. Another example might be listening to the smooth jazz that someone mentioned earlier, but really trying to notice all of the notes, maybe like holding their hand to their headphone to kind of like feel the vibration. I love brushing my teeth, yes, in the morning, and there's a lot of sounds and smells and tastes to that. Drinking a cup of coffee or tea. So this is a great self-compassion ritual. I have my little Totoro character on my mug. He sort of comforts me. By the way, and a lot of us in the counseling center have lots of little toys in our offices, but I like cute little toys. So I have lots of little critters around me, and they're just like fun things that help me just be playful and remind me also that kindness is important, because they're all like friendly little critters. Okay, so when the person mentioned coffee, tea, I got on a tangent there, but warm liquid, hot temperatures really activate that parasympathetic nervous system. So that's a great one. I'm also seeing making my bed, spraying air freshener. Your olfactory, your sense of smell, does a lot for your parasympathetic, your calming system. So when you use essential oils or the smell of coffee or chocolate or things like that really help. Granola with blueberries, lots of textures and flavors. Crunchy things are great, things you can hear. The shower, the temperature of the water, shampoo, body wash, sound of the water, breathing, and the steam, the suds. Yes, showers are great for this. Going outside, standing in the sun. That's a huge one. And that's all of these, y'all, are great because they're basically free or really low cost. Watching squirrels, animals are great for this. So my critters are kind of my version of animals that I can have in my office. But if I could bring in actual animals, that would be even better. Because the animals really kind of, watching them can be interesting. You can kind of get, invested in the hijinks and the funny things they do. But it's also just like, connecting with nature, I think, is another great way to do that. Okay, so that's another idea for this, mindful savoring. All it needs is 5 minutes and some kind of daily activity. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so now I'll give you an example of a guided meditation. And I think in the interest of time, we're not actually going to do it, but I'll introduce you to it. So on this one, you start, and it really doesn't matter how you sit. I just talked about how we think of meditation as the person sitting in a lotus pose in a location that's really calming. And then here's a picture of it. So there is that stereotype of what meditation is. But you could be doing this while you're on the Texas State shuttle with all of the noises and people around you. You could still like put in your headphones, or even just pay attention to the noises and still do this. It may be harder at first, and that's okay. So it begins by imagining a loved one. And I always tell people to take a moment to choose this and maybe even make up your own. If it's hard to think of someone in your life, it could even be a character. So it could be like a kind mentor character. It could be Obi-Wan Kenobi, or it could be some of the examples that y'all have given. So imagining that kind, compassionate person and starting there. Some other examples, if you have trouble thinking of someone, are your pet or an animal that you love, because they love you, and it doesn't have to be human. It could even just be like right now I'm in my office and there's a window and I can see this eagle sort of flying through the sky, and this idea of like sort of connecting with that. So those are some ideas for the loved one to start with. But basically it should be with someone that you don't have a very complicated relationship with. Most relationships are complicated. So maybe a child, that's another good example of this. It could be like, your niece or your, tiny cousin, or, someone that maybe it's your own child, someone who's just really small. And so there's not a lot of complication there either. Okay. So you begin by saying kind words to that loved one. So that's why we start with someone that it's kind of easy to feel love for, whether it's the eagle in the sky or the little baby or your grandma or whoever it might be. Again, fictional character, Katniss Everdeen, right? Rue from the Hunger Games. She's sort of like vulnerable at first, right? So you start with words to them. And I'll go with Rue because that's the example that just came to my mind. Like, Rue, I really want you to be able to survive this. I care about you. You're a really cool person, and I want you to be okay. If that Hunger Games reference is lost on people, go with whatever yours is, right? To this child or to this animal, I love you. I care about you. I want the best for you. So begin by saying those words. That's how you get started. Then you include yourself together with them. So this is the bridge between you. It's sort of saying like, we're both alive on this earth, and we're both worth being loved and cared for. And so then you say the same words over again. We are loved. We are worthy. We are good people. We deserve to have a good life, some of those kind things. And this is the hard part, but you've bridged to get yourself there. Now it's just saying those words to yourself. So the example would be, I am worth caring about, or my voice is important, or I am allowed to make mistakes, right? Because you would say that to the child, you would say that to your grandma, things like that. So you can do this in many, many ways. I just gave you a couple of examples of words that I might use. There are scripted versions of this that feel really silly to me. So they're saying things like, may you be well. Well, I'm not going to talk like that to anyone, actually. Like if my friend next door comes over to my office and says, I had a bad day, I'm not going to say, may you be well. But I'm going to say, I care about you, or that's awful, I'm sorry you had a bad day, or something like that. So it works best when it's in your own language. Go ahead on to the next one, please. Okay, so I think this is the last example of a sort of practice to do, but it's writing your way to self-compassion. 3 different types of writing. The first is writing a letter to yourself from a compassionate friend. So this is called externalizing. It's taking this person that's outside of you and then kind of thinking from their perspective. And you want to choose a kind person who's going to say nice things to you, but that you trust and you believe them. Sometimes it may be kind of hard to believe them, and that's okay. You can still practice this even if you're not sure you totally trust it. And what I mean by that is you trust that their intentions are good, but sometimes it's just hard to hear nice things about yourself, right? So my example might be my friend Meg. I might imagine her telling me, you're trying really hard. You're learning a lot. You're doing a good job. I see you. And I'll write in her voice to me. And sometimes that's easier than writing those words to myself. Another example is writing it from you, but you're writing it to your childhood self. And what I like to do in my self-compassion group is have people bring in a picture of themselves as a little kid. And when you see yourself as a kid, sometimes it's a little bit easier to access those feelings of self-compassion because you're like a mini you. So you're small and you can kind of see how little you knew at that point and how much you kind of needed help and relied on other people. And so writing a letter to them, oh my gosh, like you have so many things are going to happen to you and I want to protect you. And so that's another good writing exercise. And then the third one is just to track your self-compassion every day. So, and it could just be a number 1 to 5, like the scale. It could, you don't even have to take the survey to say, I'm kind of about, I'm kind of down at a 2 today. I'm being pretty critical today. And that's just where I am today. You don't have to judge that. Or it could be a little more writing, like today I really struggled to be compassionate after I failed that test. I told myself this. So it's just kind of the tracking of it, or celebrating those moments when you are compassionate, to be able to say, today I failed that test, but I reminded myself that there's a lot more to this class that's still left, and I can keep trying, and I did my best to study. Maybe I can ask for help. And there's more to me than being a student. And so, my value is not based on my grade. So those kinds of things, those are really hard things to do. So if you're ever able to do them, writing that down and celebrating that. Can you go to the next slide, please, Richard? All right, I'm going to kind of breeze through this. Brené Brown has a lot of great videos. She has a Netflix special. She has YouTube. What I'm going to recommend doing is just going to YouTube and looks like someone raised a hand. Let me actually try to copy out this link into the share. Because sometimes the reason we struggle with self-compassion is because... Okay, that was my YouTube coming up, but now I'm going to copy the link into here. Brené is the bomb. Yes, she is. I love her. Okay, so this one is a link to her on YouTube talking about 3 ways to interrupt the shame spiral. So this is, everyone experiences shame, and that can really kick you off into a spiral of beating yourself up. So she talks about 3 good tools. One of them is just speaking shame. So saying, I'm feeling this right now, right? That's a key step to it. I'll let you watch if you want to watch some of the other ones. But one of her books that I love is called Daring Greatly. And it's about vulnerability. She talks a lot about shame in it, but it's a good go-to. I'll share a couple other books with you at the end. Great Netflix special. Thank you, Elijah. I can't remember what it's called, but if you go to Netflix, and actually I'm just Googling it now, The Call to Courage, there it is. Thanks for reminding me of that. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? I'm going to skip through these because of time. So there are 3 poems that I use in my group: The Guest House by Rumi, Wild Geese by Mary Oliver, and Love After Love by Derek Walcott are great poems. The next slide, if you can jump to that, has the text of The Guest House by Rumi. They're just different ways of thinking about self-compassion. Like I showed you a comic strip. Brené Brown will tell you about it. You can take a scale. You can write your way in. If you like poetry, you can read poems. So just another option. But we'll skip over that for now because it takes a little bit to read and talk about. Just a few other book ideas. So the one on the left is Kristen Neff's Self-Compassion, endorsed by Brené Brown, a transformative read. Then there's The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion by Christopher Germer, and the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook, where Christopher Germer and Kristen Neff wrote it together. So in that one, there's a lot more kind of like interaction. You're writing things down. It's almost like one of those journals that's like a guided journal. Workbooks are cool for that if you like to really like interact with what you're reading. Any book recommendations for teenagers was a question. There may be, I would think at this point, there's a lot out there about self-compassion. I can't say for sure. But I would look around just on whatever place you like to buy books and look for, I bet there is a teen version of this. And probably on Kristen Neff's website, self-compassion.org, she has a whole references list. And I bet if there's anything out there for teenagers, it's on there too. Can you go to the next slide? Or that may be the last one, actually. That's it. Okay. A list of those poems. Yes, I can just type them in briefly. So Guest House by Rumi. Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. Here we go. Okay, so I think maybe we have a couple more minutes for Q&A. Is that correct?
Yes, if you all have any questions, we have just a few minutes. Feel free to use the Q&A feature, and then we'll respond to as many as we can. Usually it takes a minute for folks to
come through,
get their questions. We have people asking about accessing the links for future reference. We will be posting this presentation on our YouTube channel and also on our website under the self-help resources. There's a tab labeled recorded presentations, and you'll be able to access this entire presentation there. It usually just takes us about a week or two to get it captioned and up there. But at that point, you can replay any part of this, and you'll also be able to look through the links and whatnot.
And I want to shout out Dr. Richard Martinez and Elijah Miller, who are like amazing in creating these over the summer, setting them up, figuring out how the technology works. But more than that, like they kind of designed this whole series. So if you've enjoyed this series, any of them, this is, I want to give them a lot of credit for putting this together.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Mark, would you maybe want to say, oh, here we go. We got some Q&As going on. If you want to take a look in the Q&A tab, and then that way you can kind of see if there's anything that you have time to answer.
Yeah, I'll start with, okay, so the second one here asks about the connection between self-compassion and anti-racism, and Chris and Neff had a seminar on it, which I'm glad to know about. I want to go find that. You know, one thing that I think I wish I had more time for, and wish, you know, this is on me to have incorporated more, is the element of culture in this. You know, when I talked about people having experiences over their lives that really contribute to criticism, I think being part of an oppressed identity really makes that so much harder. So when someone struggles with self-compassion, I don't want to put it on them as something that's their fault. I want to look at the big picture of what has society been telling them about who they are. And what I believe is that, you know, our society has really done a terrible job of building up really anyone who's not white as an example within I think that's very relevant to self-compassion. So if I'm talking with someone and they've had experiences of oppression in their life, it's going to be that much harder to be self-compassionate because they keep hearing from people that they're not worthwhile. Sometimes that's just an explicit message. But racism works on so many levels of explicit and implicit. And so I think people also in communities of color really learn, you know, negative messages from a kind of white majority culture in all kinds of ways that then impact how much access they have to self-compassion. So it is a privilege in a way to be able to be self-compassionate, because probably if it comes real easy, you've had a lot of people in your life and culturally just to remind you that you are worthwhile. And everyone is worthwhile. That's a good thing to hear, but we don't tell people that equally by any stretch. And so, so working against, you know, being anti-racist, working against racism, you know, a big part of that could be reinforcing compassionate messages and you know, shifting shifting how we relate to people who are different from us. I think the onus is on people that have privilege and power to yield some of that. And I know that could be a whole seminar of its own that's really important. So I'm glad you brought up that question. Another question was, what type of therapy, in your opinion, incorporates self-compassion? There's actually now compassion, is it derived or focused therapy? It has its own acronym, like a lot of the other therapies, CBT and DBT and things like that. Maybe it's CFT, compassion focused therapy. And therapists, I've now are kind of identifying that way as like how they do therapy, as like, because it connects a lot of things that therapists do. But if you're interested in self-compassion, I would just ask, if you're shopping around for therapists or if you're already in therapy, just ask your therapists about it. And, if they don't know about it already, is that something that if you're interested in, ask them if they're open to it, or if they're open to learning a little bit more about it so you can work on it together. Or if you want to fire them and shop for another therapist that's okay too. So a lot of therapists are integrating this, and some are doing that like really explicitly, like saying, I am this type of therapist, like compassion focused. So I'm seeing a few more. I know we're close to time, so I wish we had more time with these. So another really good point is that I think there's a huge gender piece to this too. In my group, I think the ratio of gender tends to be like a preponderance of female identified clients in the group. And I talk about that with the group and sort of ask them what their impression is. And what I've heard from people is that women are told, and implicitly told, that they're not worth as much as men. And that starts very, very early in life. And so gender is another important identity. And when women struggle with self-compassion, there are cultural reasons for that. Absolutely. Same thing with sexual identity and gender identity in terms of identifying as trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming. There's so many layers to this. But I think that was an important point about gender identity there too. I think we might just be butting up against 3 o'clock.
Thank you so much, Mark. And sorry we didn't get a chance to get to all of the questions, but really appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you so much, Dr. Province, for enlightening us all with the self-compassion. And like I said, the presentation will be up on our YouTube channel, and we'll be posting it on our social media